morning and welcome to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting for November 6, 2018. Madam Clerk, closed session agenda.
Item 1, pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization Service Employees International Union.
Are there any public comments on this item? Seeing none, we will go to closed session. Good morning and welcome to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting for November 6, 2018. Please rise if you can for the pledge. Supervisor Oliveira, will you please lead us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No hoorah?
Correction day.
All right. Madam Clerk, can you please report out for our closed session this morning?
Item 1 on today's closed session agenda, conference with labor negotiator. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization Service Employees International Union. There was no reportable action taken.
Thank you. All right, moving on to announcements. Madam Clerk.
This is a time for board members and county staff to provide updates of upcoming county events that may be of interest to the public.
Any board members have announcements? Supervisor Mills.
This is just a reminder again, the 11th day, the 11th hour of the 11th month is Veterans Day celebration, and there will be one and a parade in Copperopolis at that time for anyone that would like to attend. It's probably one of the single largest parades that they hold in Copperopolis, so if you're a veteran, it might be a good opportunity to come on down and show your support.
Any other board member? Any staff member have announcements?
Good morning, Michelle Patterson, OES Director.
Kristen Brinks, Health and Human Services.
So today we just wanted to share that on November 1st, OES and Public Health hosted a drive-through flu vaccination clinic out here in the Government Center parking lot. This was the first time that this county has conducted such an event. It is considered an exercise for one of the grant programs under Public Health Emergency Preparedness. And with the assistance of Public Works, the Sheriff's Office, GIS, Community Emergency Response Teams, colleagues from El Dorado County, and the community that came out, we vaccinated 141 individuals that day. This event was a huge success, by far blew us all away with the success of the project, and we're looking forward to doing such other collaborative events with Public Health as we move forward with our collaboration.
Are we counting you two as part of the 141?
I had previously gotten my flu shot at Walgreens.
I see.
And I'm going this weekend because I was at my association meeting.
And I am counted as one of those.
You are
And
one.
I can attest that they had great LVNs and RNs and maybe PHNs out there, that it was one of the best, easiest flu shots I'd actually ever gotten. I didn't even have any pain the next day.
I heard you didn't even notice that you...
What's that?
I heard that you didn't even notice that you got it.
The hard part, though, was that she went higher, and so I practically had to strip in the parking lot. That was the only downside.
There was
We
no
didn't need to
press.
hear that.
Where's HR?
That's not the word I heard.
I heard there's all kinds of tears and crying.
Well,
That's
thank you so much.
all we wanted to share. Thank you.
Great job. Any other staff announcements? Seeing none, we'll bring it back and we'll go to general public comments. Madam Clerk.
Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard.
All right, public comments this morning. Any public comments? Seeing no public comments? We'll close public comments and bring it back to the board. Go to consent agenda.
Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Any board member wish to pull an item? Supervisor Mills?
Don't wish to pull an item, but I do wish to comment before we make the vote.
Okay. Any other board member? Any staff member wish to pull an item? Any member of the public wish to pull an item from the consent? Seeing none, we'll bring it back. I'll look for a motion. Or first, Supervisor Mills, you have a comment?
Yes, only a comment to commend the staff for, in the financial section, putting in the codes. I really do appreciate taking that effort. And with that, I would make the motion to approve the consent calendar.
So I have we have a motion by Supervisor Mills. We have a second by Supervisor Clapp. Supervisor Oliveri, you have any comments you'd like?
No, waiting for the vote, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to our regular agenda. Number 14, Madam Clerk.
This item is from the Office of Emergency Services to receive a presentation by representatives of PG&E providing information on the PG&E Community Wildfire Safety Program.
Do we need any time to set up? Is there a PowerPoint of any type?
There is, yes.
So we'll take a 5-minute break, allow you to set up. Okay. All right, we are back in session. We are set up with a PowerPoint. This is PG&E going to give us a presentation providing information on the Community Wildfire Safety Program. So, Michelle, you want to start out?
Good morning, Michelle Patterson, OES Director. Today we have PG&E here to give a presentation about their Community Wildfire Safety Program, which also includes the Public Safety Power Shutdown Program that was actually implemented several weeks ago. And so they're happy to answer questions about the entire program and about that event in particular. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dylan George with PG&E.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Dylan George, Local Public Affairs Representative for PG&E. We appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time this morning to talk about our Community Wildfire Safety Program. It's a program that has impacted members of your county in several ways, one being the increased tree trimming that we're doing, and one being, as Michelle mentioned, the recent Public Safety Power Shutoff event. I want to introduce a couple of our staff people that are here to answer customer questions if there are any. Kelly O'Flynn is with our Vegetation Management Department, and Teresa English is one of our customer service representatives, so they'll be sticking around after we're done with our presentation if anybody has questions specific to their property. I am going to turn it over to Aaron Johnson, who's PG&E Vice President that's overseeing elements of the Community Wildfire Safety Program, and he's going to give the majority of the presentation. But before I do that, I want to thank Michelle Patterson. This was the first event that I really had a chance to work with her, and I think this county is very lucky to have her as the Office of Emergency Services Director. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron Johnson.
Thank you and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. Again, my name is Aaron Johnson, and I have responsibility for significant elements of our Community Wildfire Safety Program, which is all work that we have really been accelerating as a company since the fires last year and the fire seasons, really driven by the couple of fire seasons that we've seen both last year and this year. So my goal is to provide you with an overview of that entire program, and then specifically to speak to the public safety power shutoff event that we had a few weeks ago and how it affected Calaveras County and generally the PG&E service territory in total. I do want to just start by acknowledging that these are new things that we are doing as a company. The last couple of fire seasons, I think last year it was 5 of the 20 biggest fires in the state. This year we're already at 3 of the biggest fire seasons, and the rain doesn't seem to be anywhere on the horizon. It has really required us to have a big mindset shift as a company and to really start doing some things quickly. When you do things quickly, they don't always go smoothly, as you know. We're headed in the right direction, we think. Certainly welcome your feedback as you hear about this today and some of the things we're taking on. But I want to acknowledge that they're not all fully baked. So we are evolving some of these programs. Some of the things you will hear about today, we're going to continue to assess if we do get an off season, and I really hope we do. We really want to look at some of these programs that we've stood up for this year and figure out how to continue to evolve them. We need feedback from OES directors in the counties to hear about the public safety power shutoff event. We've been trying to talk to a lot of folks since the first event. Things never go great the first time you have an event. We acknowledge that. We think it was the right thing to do for public safety, but we know we have some work to do in terms of making that a smoother process for customers and for communities overall. And we are strongly committed to making sure that program, again, a last resort option for us, one we don't hope to call often, but that we'll get better at doing that if we need to do that again in the future. Okay, I think the stage is pretty set. We all know why some of these activities are happening. Just the amount of wildfire activity that we've been seeing the last couple of years has really necessitated us to take a look at our work. Safety is always a core value for PG&E, but another core value is reliability. And at the end of the day, one of the things we're most proud of and culturally built to do is to keep the gas flowing and the lights on. And we are having to reassess some of our commitment to reliability. We'll always have that commitment, but how do we trade that off with public safety is a big element of some of the programs that I'm going to talk to you about today. So this next slide, we'll stay here for a good chunk of this presentation, and please just jump in with your questions as you have them. This is really the overview of the activities that we have been taking since over the winter as we put this program in place. The first column is really improving our situational awareness. The middle column is some enhanced safety measures and how we operate the grid and maintain the equipment around the grid. And then the third is kind of longer term. What do we need to do to ultimately make the electric grid, in particular, more robust in the future and more impervious to wildfire risk in particular? So let me talk to each in a little bit of detail. On the situational awareness, we have stood up a 24/7 wildfire safety operations center that runs out of our San Francisco general office with a backup in San Ramon in the East Bay region. And that is really monitoring wildfire risk and how wildfire affects utility infrastructure. And so that is a 24/7 facility that we have stood up to really have a better handle on how fire is potentially affecting PG&E infrastructure. We've enhanced our weather station network. We've been working a lot with CAL FIRE at the state level, and we always appreciate local recommendations as well as to where we can extend weather stations. We need more data around humidity and wind speed in order to be able to monitor wildfire risk. So we've put 140 weather stations out, goal of 200 by the end of the year, and a goal of 1,000 by 2020. These are public weather stations. We're putting them out in the network in places where communities and the first responder community have wanted more access to weather data. So we're just building out that network. And then we're just beginning to also install more high-definition cameras to really monitor situational awareness. The first 9 of those will go out on a pilot basis, I think, starting next month. So, and again, the plan to install many hundreds of those over the next several years. In the middle column are some of the things that we're doing to really change the way we operate the grid. The first is implementing some new vegetation management standards. So we had a bit of a patchwork of standards between federal, state, and local requirements. Those have harmonized around higher fire risk areas at a 4-foot standard. with a suggestion that you cut back more like 12 foot at time of trim. So we've been implementing that in the highest fire risk areas for this summer. That work is done, and for next summer we have to do it in the next level of fire risk areas, the so-called Tier 2 areas. We've done the Tier 3. We're also doing some enhanced clearance, 2 different programs. One, we're going back and looking at clearing from conductor to sky. To really reduce the possibility of limbs and branches falling into our infrastructure as part of that program. And then we're also looking to do an entirely voluntary program to clear 15-foot rights-of-way around our distribution infrastructure. This would look a little bit more like what you see from major highways. Sometimes when you see the big steel lattice poles around transmission, right, we have federal requirements that keep those rights-of-way basically clear of all vegetation. So we're not looking to go quite as big as those, but rather than have these radial standards where you just clear around the line, we're actually looking to clear the whole area around a line as part of this program. That's a voluntary program. We have to get permission from landholders. We don't have the right to do that on our easements, so that is a series of individual conversations with customers around their willingness to let us do that program. But that's our desire to go above and beyond just what our obligations are for compliance with various state and federal and local rules. We're disabling some technology on the system. We have what are called reclosers. It's a fancy word for just something just like a circuit breaker in your house. Your house trips off, and you go downstairs and you flip that circuit breaker back on, and 99 times out of 100, whatever problem you had in your house is gone. Well, we have the same phenomenon on the bulk electricity system, and so we have technology on there that waits. We see a bird on a line, a tree branch, just tests back in, waits a few seconds, gets people's lights right back on. Whatever that problem was on the grid is oftentimes gone. We don't have to send a person out to go patrol the line or take a look. We can just test back in. And in most instances where that happens, for a momentary outage, the line is restored and quickly, and people get their power on, sometimes within seconds or minutes. Now, doing that, if a wire is actually down in high fire danger conditions, can be a risk, and that has been a source of a number of ignitions in the state. And so we are disabling that technology on high fire risk areas for the technologies that are automated. About a third of these are manual. They're in remote areas where we don't have communication with them, so we have turned those off for fire season. It does mean when there are outages, they'll be slightly longer to send someone out to clear and patrol lines. We are in the process of automating the rest of that system. We're having to use satellite communications to get to some of these devices, but we're committed to doing that, so that'll be an entirely automated program next year. So that will hopefully lessen some of the impacts for customers from a reliability perspective, but still keep the system safe, and we'll turn off that technology on very high and extreme fire danger days, which is our current practice today, based on email we get at 0600 to our distribution control centers. So that's to me the classic program that illustrates that balance between reliability and mitigating fire risk. And then finally, we'll talk about this in a little more detail. A last resort program for us is this idea of this public safety power shutoff, where when a truly extreme weather conditions are coming, really driven by high fire danger conditions, really dry, lots of dry fuel on the ground, really low humidity, coupled with the kind of winds that we know historically cause power lines to come down. And not come down because they're not rated for that wind, but come down because debris breaks loose, often vegetation, and flies into our lines. No matter how far back you've trimmed it, branches can come from much further away, hit lines, very tall trees can come down on occasion, knock lines over, and that can be a potential ignition source. And so in the most extreme weather conditions, that's something we're looking at potentially turning off power proactively in advance of that. So we'll spend a fair bit of time on this, and that'll be the bulk of, frankly, my presentation, to talk to you about that program and how it works and how it went with the first episode we had of that. And then finally, really the answer is coming, in terms of the things that we can do proactively. The vegetation cutback is something that we can do quickly, but will take a bit of time. certainly doing a lot over the last few months, but that will be, a year or two in the making to really clear all of the vegetation around to these new standards in our service territory. The hardening is more of like a decade program. This is really looking at the highest fire risk areas that we serve and saying, what do we do to fully replace that infrastructure with more robust infrastructure? So instead of wood poles, maybe steel or composite poles, maybe where we use lower grade wood poles, only using the highest grade wood poles, replacing bare wire with coated wire, reconfiguring the cross arms so that the wires are less likely to slap together in high wind conditions. And then also building, there'll be some undergrounding that will come with that. Generally, undergrounding in high fire risk areas, which are steep and rugged, is extremely expensive, in the 3 to 10x of what it costs to build overhead lines. But we know that we're going to need to do additional undergrounding, so also undergrounding more circuits going forward. And then finally, developing sort of resilient zones within communities, which is working with individual communities in high fire risk areas to say, how do we pre-wire your fire station, your community center, your high school gym, whatever it is where people congregate in an emergency, how do we sort of pre-wire that up, lay a pad, and have all the connections ready for communities that want to invest in backup generation and have that all configured to go. A lot of some communities have that already, some that we work with don't, and when you're actually trying to set it up in an emergency, it can be a real challenge. And so how do we get out in front of that and just pre-build all that infrastructure for communities? And so we're doing a couple of pilots this year in the North Bay area to really test that proof of concept and see if we can begin building that out in different communities. So let me pause there. That's sort of an overview of the program. I'm going to spend the majority of the rest of the time speaking to the public safety power shutoff program and then the vegetation management that we're doing at the tail end of the presentation. But any questions I can answer on the general overall program itself?
Questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Oliveira?
Thank you very much for coming. I'm very interested in hearing the underground aspect of your presentation here. In my district, it's a very high concern. As you probably can tell, Mr. George, everybody is looking at that underground concept. We do realize that, so hopefully this information will be disseminated with our folks here on TV. So, thank you.
Yeah. Did you want me to speak further to that, or?
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand if that.
I hope we're going to be discussing that in a little bit more detail.
Okay, so I don't have a big piece on undergrounding here, but I'm happy to chat about that a little bit further. Generally, with undergrounding for us, obviously new infrastructure is built underground. There are a series of requirements. So over the last, I would say, 2-3 decades, new communities are undergrounded. It's the retrofitting that has gone at a fairly slow pace. We have a number of funding sources for communities to do that. It's not a lot of money, frankly, across a very big service territory that we serve. And generally, those have been beautification programs to date. They have not been driven as much by public safety. As we look at rebuilding the infrastructure, we know that we have early engineering estimates. There's about 7,100 miles of distribution out of our approximate 100,000 miles of distribution that we have that are in these highest fire risk areas. And I'll flash up a map, and you've got it on the presentation of where some of those areas are here in this county. And the thinking is that our early engineering estimates are probably in about 10% of the cases. It makes sense to go ahead economically and underground that. Again, it really depends on what the cost trade-off will be. As we're rebuilding it, it will be economic to do some undergrounding. Generally, as I alluded to, it is significantly more expensive, 3 to 10 times as much to underground. And that has been, in my time, and I spent some time in the customer service organization at PG&E before, I never got a lot of letters or emails or calls asking for ways for us to make people's bills larger. So that's been frankly the trade-off. We know we have to relook at that because of fire danger and that risk and concern, and that's why with this program we think we'll be doing significantly more retrofitting of undergrounding compared to what we've done in the past. Okay, so let's speak to the Public Safety Power Shutoff Program. This is really, again, as I said, a last resort for us. So what we are looking at is weather forecasts. We're looking at real high fire danger conditions, red flag warnings from the National Weather Service. Our standard is much higher than a red flag warning, so that doesn't necessarily mean every time you hear a red flag warning that that we would be doing a public safety power shutoff, but it'd be pretty unlikely that we would have a public safety power shutoff if there wasn't a red flag warning. So that would be a step in that process. It's again, dry fuel on the ground, really high fire danger conditions, kind of conditions that are present this time of year before we get our rain. So most likely in the fall, before the rain starts, when everything's really dried out. So low humidity, temperature not as big a driver. It's okay if it's cool. That doesn't necessarily mean we're out of fire danger conditions. And the thing that really makes this program a likelihood is really high wind, right? Because we know the effect that wind historically has on our infrastructure. Generally, we do all of our staffing for winter storms based on wind models that we have that tell us, based on this kind of wind speed, what sort of damage we expect to see on the system and how many folks we're going to need out to restore power. Well, all that information is great for winter storms, but now when we see those kind of wind conditions before it's raining, we're trying to combine that knowledge and really figure out when we think it's possible that our infrastructure is going to come down and be a potential source of a wildfire. And in those wind conditions, that's obviously very prime for a catastrophic fire that starts moving through a community quickly. So those are the conditions that we're really looking for. We would have observers, field personnel out in the field to validate that the models that are telling us that weather is coming are how we would do it. And then as part of our process, as soon as we stand up our Emergency Operations Center to be on watch for this, reaching out to local OESs as well as CAL FIRE and Cal OES to give them an early notification. For a normal emerging, and I hate to say normal weather in the kind of weather that we've seen the last several years, we would expect that we would be able to give about a 72-hour notification to those folks in advance. In the actual event we had several weeks ago, it was more like 36 hours. So we had an event that ramp that we saw on the horizon that didn't look like it was at this magnitude, was pretty below, and then overnight really became a much stronger event. And you saw it with some of the national NOAA and the National Weather Service all kind of caught a little flat-footed and put out red flag warnings kind of a little bit late. All the weather folks were a little caught off guard by this one. So we made that notification. Informing customers is a huge part of this program. Our goal is to have a 48-hour, a 24-hour, and then a real-time notice to the customer. We've been doing a lot of outreach to customers to encourage them to update their contact info with us. So folks that are potentially part of this program, we send a lot of letters, various communication with them saying, your call to action with your utility, we're developing a plan, you need to develop a plan, and part of your plan is please update your contact information for us. So as we start early days on this program, we wanted a big focus on getting the inform part of this correct, right? We got to let people know that this is potentially coming. Once we turn off power in an event, we would let that weather pass, we would get an all clear in our Emergency Operations Center, and then we would begin restoration. This is the real challenge, and we certainly saw this in this event. It was a beautiful fall day as soon as that wind was gone, and people don't understand why we don't turn the power back on right away. The technical challenge for us is once the grid is down, we lose the eyes and ears. And in order to turn it back on safely, and to make sure there is no damage in what was a fairly substantial wind event, we have to patrol physically every inch of those lines before we can turn them back on. We patrolled 3,400 miles of distribution line in 36 hours in that event. That's a long time for people that are waiting for power. For us, that was a really big lift, and we were pretty proud of that achievement. There's a lot of room for improvement. One of the advantages about being a big utility is we have a lot of resources, and we brought a lot of them in for this event. I guarantee you when we have our next event, we will bring even more. We need to direct the entire energy of the company to restoring people to power as quickly as possible when we have one of these events. Here is where the so-called Public Safety Power Shutoff Program affects Calaveras County. You'll note that the areas sort of on the north end of this map were where the actual program was. It wasn't in effect in the entirety of the county. We have a technical program that's built off an old CAL FIRE map system from the 80s that's called a fire index area. It's about a third of a county size, and that's the size that we have weather information for. And so one of the fire index areas sort of cuts across the top part of the county there. And part of the thing that we need to do is get better information to people like Michelle and the various county OESs around exactly what those different footprints are, and in various technical GIS kind of maps. And that's one of the things that we've done generally but not specifically enough in front of this event and as part of the real-time event, so that it's very clear who's potentially affected. So we're targeting these highest fire risk areas. It is a little counterintuitive to the public because our grid does not have nice, clean turnoff points right at the edge of some of these high fire risk areas. So a circuit may travel in an area, say in a downtown core of a more developed area like an Angels Camp or something. It's not affected in this, but we had it in El Dorado County where parts of Placerville were actually out of power, even though that's not considered a high fire risk area right there. And so in the future, we're trying to add more automation and more sectionalization, we call it, protection devices on our system so that we can clear away these less risky areas and try and limit the area of blue that's sort of a spillover effect where it isn't a high fire risk area, but just because of the natural configuration of the grid, we had to turn off power there too.
I was going to bring up a point about your spillover effect, and that is that the way your grid breaks down between Angels Camp and Vallecito and Douglas Flat, for instance, Vallecito is your break point. So there's parts of the town site that are basically on the Angels Camp side of the grid, and the others are on the Camp 9 side or the Douglas Flat side of the grid. So that spillover is going to occur into communities that you don't have listed here, even though simply because your mapping is going to draw it there. Your grid's going to draw it there, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and there's a lot we can do. We've actually got a team of about a dozen engineers that are currently trying to figure out what we can do to reconfigure. Some of the grid is just built the way it is. I talked about the long-term hardening. One of the things to think about for us is how do we actually not just replace equipment with like for better, but is how do we potentially reroute lines, add lines, change the configuration of the grid over time. Those things won't happen overnight. There's a lot we want to have in place before next fire season. Hopefully we get a break, right, to really eliminate some of that spillover. So if there are particular instances that occurred in this event or it's something that we would like to do coordinating with local county OES folks is to get that input, and as we build out some of those new plans, really sort of help identify for the community, okay, here's what we were able to take out of this program.
Yeah, if you could look at Vallecito itself, I think that's the one community that has that dual
Yep.
system. And I know the challenges that Utica Water and Power had faced with that same area on interconnecting with their Murphy's power plant with PG&E. It's the same situation. It's because of the way the grid is aligned going up Highway 4.
Yep.
Beyond Murphy's up into Arnold, that's just a whole different animal from what you have over, for instance, in the West Point, Wilseyville area.
Okay. I'll connect with Dylan, and we'll connect, and we'll have that conversation with the engineering team that's looking at this. But I appreciate that call out. Some details on the actual program that we had. So it was back on October 14th. I'll tell you, probably 3 of the longest days of my life. Didn't get a lot of sleep. Been responsible for designing this program, a tool that I hope to never take out of the bottom of the tool chest, and there we were. So ultimately affected around 60,000 residences, and just to be very candid about it, right? So we serve 16 million people, 5.3 million electric meters. So on average, and a premise it serves around 3 people. So that's almost 200,000 people, just on average, that are affected. It's a mix of businesses and homes, obviously, but it's a good rule of thumb. So about a 3-to-1 ratio there. So so we affected, again, and that says customers, it should say premises, about 2,500 premises in Calaveras, and about 125 medical baseline customers. Medical baseline are customers who have a need for more electricity. They have to run some sort of essential electrical equipment, and that's the best indicator we have of our most vulnerable residential customers. So we have done additional outreach campaigns to those customers in the actual event. They don't just get a notification, they have to acknowledge that notification through a text back or a response to an email or by pressing a button on a phone call. If we don't get that, we were live calling those customers. If we don't make contact on a live call out of our call centers, then we actually roll a truck to knock on doors on the premises of those customers. Again, we use our metering techs and our gas service representatives. These are people who are in people's homes lighting pilot lights and things like that, so they've got good training on how to engage with folks. They are not first responders, and if we get to one of these customers and they say, I don't have a plan, I don't have family or friends nearby, I don't have a community-based organization that I work with for support, our final resort is to offer to call 911 on their behalf. And then you can see some of the schools that were affected. When we do the restoration, we prioritize the circuits based on things like hospitals, schools, water purveyors, some of the essential services in the most critical facilities. Now, I will just be candid with you. Our circuits are long, and there aren't a lot of circuits we have that don't have some element of that on almost every circuit. So that prioritization is making some tough choices. But our goal is not to have anybody wait. It's to have as many field crews as possible out there so that we can begin restoring those lines. And we do step restoration, which is we work our way out from the central points of the grid, and as soon as we clear a section, we turn that section back on, and then we work our way to the more remote sections of some of the circuits. So I think we did an okay job of that in the last event. We know we've come up with a new incident command structure for our field teams that we think will be even more efficient and allow us to do that more quickly. We've also contracted for more helicopter resources to be able to call helicopters in to do aerial patrols on a number of the lines as well. So we think we've got some better plans in there. 36 hours. Our company goal was 24. We didn't meet that in the first event, and we're going to try like hell to make sure we don't miss that next time, if there is a next time. And unfortunately, there probably will be. So really trying to make sure we can get power back on for folks as quickly as possible. That event, again, was driven by these same weather conditions that I spoke to. We had National Weather Service red flag warnings with winds gusting in the 45 to 55 mile an hour range. We say that winds in the round, as a general rule of thumb, in the 25 to 30 mile an hour range sustained are what cause our infrastructure to sustain damage, and gusts in the 45 to 50. So we were squarely at that threshold. We saw very low humidity. Generally, we're looking for humidity under 20%. We were down in the single digits in a lot of these areas. And we had the warm temperatures and then the critically dry fuel on the ground. And then we use our Wildfire Safety Operations Center to monitor what different first responder communities are hearing out on their radios and the chatter we hear there. And then obviously we also deploy field personnel to observe if the weather conditions that are forecast are starting to materialize. It's a tough judgment call, and sitting in that Emergency Operations Center, I'm not the decider, but our Senior Vice President of Electric Operations, responsible for 7,000 people in PG&E's organization, sat there and made that decision, and he said it was the toughest decision he's ever made in his career. So pretty elevated to the most senior levels of the company, not something we take lightly, but it is a judgment call, because if you wait, and if you wait too long, then you have waited too long, and that's what you're trying to judge there. And we did have up in Amador County, we did have one incident of some debris coming into a power line and starting an ignition. Thankfully, a small fire that was put out and contained quickly, but some of the feedback up there was you waited a little too long. You probably should have moved earlier. So our bias is towards action, but we also recognize the essentialness of electricity, and that's not a decision we're going to enter into lightly. This is sort of how the event played out over the 3 days in the restoration. Like I said, about 36 hours for full restoration. A multi-day event that really fixated the vast majority of our resources in the company, and in any future event, we'll have almost everybody on board to be helping with that, and we're really setting up a structure that will help us deploy even more folks in a more thoughtful way to really improve that. We also know we had some notifications go out pretty late at night. We had a little bit of challenge with the systems and our telecommunications vendor, and we made the call to send some calls out pretty late. That's something we've worked to fix and we think is fixed now, so that we wouldn't be waking people up late at night to say that your power might be off the next day. So that's really what we're trying to do here. Again, we had some communications going out as late as 11 o'clock, I think, that first night that when we activated the event that morning. And then we started up again at 7 a.m. So we're really trying to stay outside of 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. for those advanced notifications. For an emergency real-time notification, we'll do those again, at whatever time makes sense. These kind of weather events tend to come overnight, our meteorology folks say, so likely the real-time notification is kind of a late afternoon, early evening notification. But again, all bets are off with the kind of extreme weather we're seeing, but that's kind of what we would expect. We've already talked about the restoration process and what we have to do to really bring the equipment back online, so I won't belabor that. But it is a multi-step process that really safety is paramount. It's not as simple as just turning the switch back on to power folks up, but we are really looking to improve our performance there. And one of the questions we always get is, well, what'd you find? What'd you see? And I'm hesitant to say, down lines justify what we did and making that decision, because you've got to make it on a forecast basis. And one of our sister utilities down in San Diego has done this a number of times, and in some instances they didn't find damage. But the forecast told them that there was a high potential of it. But in this instance, we did find significant damage on the system. 23 instances, really 18 instances where we saw significant damage on the system, and 5 instances where vegetation was sort of lying across lines and could have been a potential source of arcing or the like. So we did see fairly significant damage to the system, but again, I just caveat that we won't always see that. We've got to go based on the information we know, and the sort of Monday morning quarterbacking after the fact about it is not always going to be accurate. But again, it is something that this is the kind of damage that we would expect to see from these sort of wind conditions. With that, I'll move off public safety power shutoff and just talk for a couple minutes about vegetation, and then wrap up. I know I'm going a little bit long here, so I apologize. So the new standards that we have in place across all of PG&E's service territory. Oh, before I leave public safety power shutoff, the other question I always get that I didn't answer is, how often do you see yourself doing this? We think it's somewhere from the Oregon border to Bakersfield, which is our service territory, 70,000 square miles, in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 times a year. Not 1 to 2 times a year in Calaveras County, 1 to 2 times somewhere across our service territory. One of our goals for next year in this program is to have more granular information about the specific sort of historical wind conditions that we've seen in different communities to provide more guidance. Santa Cruz Mountains almost never see this kind of wind phenomenon. The Sierra foothills, much more likely. So we want to be able to be more specific to all of the communities, but that's the general guidance right now that we have. So these are the standards going forward, 4 foot around the conductor, around the wire. We try to cut back 12 foot at time of trim, right? You have to maintain that 4 foot standard at all times. And so we're 12 feet or more that we're cutting back when we're actually trimming the lines. The wildfire safety work that we're trying to do immediately right now is to really clear, as you see from this diagram here, clear the overhang that's really over our lines that has the greatest potential to break and fall in various weather events into the lines. And so we're trying to now clear that vegetation as well as trimming back the 12 feet to be able to maintain this new 4 foot standard in all of the areas. Some of the areas already had the 4 foot standard, It was areas, if you're a state responsibility area, you already had the 4-foot standard. If you're a local responsibility area, if you have your own local fire department, then it was only an 18-inch standard. So that's what we've been trying to get all of the highest fire risk areas to that standard for this year, and we're mostly done with that work, or we are done in the highest fire risk areas. Where we're not done, and where you're probably seeing a lot of activity in Calaveras and other counties, certainly is in clearing all this overhang that we find on to really enhance that safety standard. And then over time, what we're looking to do is clearing these corridors around our lines that I talked about at the beginning, which would be 15 feet on either side of a potential line, to really have what we're calling a fire defense zone. It's not a proper fire break. A fire department will say it's not enough to break fire, but it's a place where you can potentially start a fire break if there is an actual event, and it certainly provides access to equipment for first responders and for our own folks when they're working on lines. So that's this program that we've been doing, and probably the source of a lot of community feedback that you're hearing, and happy to hear those. And Kelly is responsible in this area for that work, and so he's here today to hear that feedback as well, and any questions you have about how that's generally structured. So with that, happy to take any general questions you have or feedback from the public, however you structure the meeting. But I do just want to say in closing that this is new for us, and we know we're not getting it all right out the go. But there's an incredible, strong commitment to recognizing fire risk as being a big part of our business, a bigger part than it's historically been. It's always been there, but never quite so central for us. We're not going to get all this right from the beginning. We know that. We need that feedback. We need to hear how to work with the community. But I want you to understand, and I hope if you take one thing away, that this is top of mind for PG&E. We are fully committed to figuring out how we incorporate fire risk into a business that's been historically really focused on. It's all about keeping the lights on and the power flowing, and how do we really integrate that fire risk in particular more into our longer term planning and our day-to-day operations of the business. And that commitment is 100%. And if there are other things we can do or other ways we can do it, we need that feedback, and we want to hear that. And just know that these programs will continue to evolve. If I were back here next spring, I think I'd have some new updates for you. And I think if I was back the year later, you'd continue to hear how we're going to evolve these programs based on how they succeed and where they miss, and know that we're going to keep trying to get better at this. So thank you for having me. Sorry for going a little bit longer than I was supposed to, but I really appreciate your time.
Supervisor Mills, you have
Yes.
a question?
Aaron, the one thing that you did not touch on is your coordination that you do with CAL FIRE and in fire scene management. I know that on July 4th of 2016, you had to shut down the power grid around Angels Camp due to a fire in Appaloosa. That is another area that probably should be included in your presentation as to how that interaction occurs, especially in emergency situations, because as firefighters, we're not going to be running around live lines, and we're certainly not going to be dropping retardant on live lines. So that's just a piece I think needs to be part of this discussion with the community as a whole, so that they understand when you're in an emergency, what you're shutting down, the reasons for shutting it down, and how you can go about the restoration process.
Yeah, and thank you for that clarification. There's a lot of source of public confusion around the public safety power shutoff, and when we shut off, again, that's a proactive program in advance of fire. Obviously, there could be fire in the area, but this sort of historical practice of turning off lines at the request of CAL FIRE or other first responders in actual emergencies, that's a many-decade-old process for us, and something that we do, unfortunately, with increasing regularity as we've seen more and more large fires. So that is separate and different, but also a very common practice related to fire for us. And again, that is at the direction of first responders, and something we do because there's an active event in the area. But thank you for highlighting that.
Supervisor Oliveira?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, very informative. I have to commend Mr. George for holding, and his crew, when they came up and held a town hall meeting regarding our recent activity with PG&E and trimming back and removal of trees. As a result of that meeting, there's been a very intense community interest in the removal of trees. And I understand our contractors are doing that for PG&E. There seems to be some contention whether or not those trees need to be removed. It's my understanding that PG&E is addressing this with their contractors. I want to make sure the public's aware of that they are aware of this problem, and they're going back and reassessing. And that seems to be working. Is that a priority? I know it
is very
for my
much a
district,
priority.
I'll be
We've
quite honest
heard
with
that
you.
feedback. As part of this program, we have, one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten from a lot of the community is, hey, there's a tree that's been flagged to be removed. That's a tree that you've historically trimmed. We are being more assertive in looking at fire risk and saying, you know, if that's a tree that's got potential, you know, proximity issues or is of a kind of species that historically we've had challenges with, limbs coming off, that sort of thing, or failure of the tree itself, that we are being more assertive than we have historically around clearing out actual trees rather than trimming. When those trees are marked, there's an opportunity to speak to the landholder and have those discussions around that if the landholder disagrees with that. And we are trying to be, I think, better going forward. We've certainly heard it when folks' responsibility is to, you know, ring the bell, check on when they're out doing the assessment, to check with the landholder. Sometimes when folks aren't home, they still go ahead and mark trees since they're out there, and we have certainly heard that feedback. Hey, I wasn't home, and all of a sudden all these trees have big X's on them now and are slated for removal. I want to be able to speak with somebody. We know we need to get out and speak with folks to better explain that and work through with them any potential issues that are there. So we've heard that feedback loud and clear. We have, you know, we had a number of a program we've been doing throughout our service territory to clear rights of way around our gas transmission lines over the last couple of years that we had unfortunately let lapse, and we have been paying on our own dime to clear those rights of way over the last 5 years, and trees were a big part of that, and we know that we found a lot of creative solutions on ways to make that work forward, and we're trying to take those lessons learned with this program and really see what we can do working with the community. I will just say, it's a real challenge. People love their trees. There's a reason we're all here in California, and the natural beauty of it is no small part, and trees make up a big part of that. That said, we're just facing, you know, more and more extreme weather, and we've got to take some measures that go beyond what we've historically done. And so we're trying to find that right balance of working with the community and also just enhancing safety standards going forward.
Thank you, sir. And like I said, Mr. George and his staff did an excellent job in that town hall meeting. Should be commended. A lot of information was available.
Thank you. And we've certainly heard that getting out and hearing people and talking to them is a huge part of it, and we know we need to do more of that.
Thanks.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate you coming up today to Calaveras County. I represent District 2, which is the area that went through the blackout and survived the Butte fire as well. Mm-hmm. You know, historically, PG&E and myself have had some issues, and the county has as well. You understand, as you are well aware, we're in current litigation. I've got at least 2 people in the audience that lost their home in the Butte fire, one that almost lost his home, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But it is, you are constantly on our mind in my district, but I want to also commend your staff. Dylan and Kelly came up. They've come to community halls in my district, done town halls. The questions are sometimes sharp, but they handle them well. Sometimes the questions from me are sharp, and they handle them well, and I appreciate it. We may not always agree, but we have an honest relationship and dialogue, and I appreciate that of your staff. So thank you very much, and thank you to Kelly and Dylan. We have had some issues around the vegetation management. I'm sure you hear them in every single county. So, but I think that, you know, you guys are learning as you've gone through this process, and you're adjusting. Showing up on a Monday morning and there's a new 2-acre base camp built at the corner of a road with no permits is a challenge, but I think we've talked through that and we know that how to avoid that in the future. The power off issue, nobody I mean, my district clearly understands the risks of trees falling on power lines. We lived it, we get it. One of the problems that we heard at town hall, and I know Dylan heard this and Kelly heard this, and I hope it filters up the food chain, is, it's really not an act. I know we're claiming act of God in order to shut off these power and avoid having to make claims. But I think it's something that PG&E should consider. Having claim forms put in place. Many of the people in my district have freezers from the nature of our community. People put away meat certain times a year, and that's worth a lot. It's not, everybody doesn't go to Whole Foods for their dinner plan. So if we could take that into consideration, I'd appreciate that. One of the things that, as you think about hardening the system over the next 2 years, I hope that you might consider working with the PUC and local providers for broadband. It's much cheaper to string where you go in a rural community across that belt that you showed in the high fire risk. It's one of the least served areas in the state for broadband. You have the ability to come up with, or through the CPUC, have the ability to come up with a low-cost way to allow local broadband providers to string cable on your poles. It's a cost-prohibitive issue right now, but I hope that you might take it on as a statewide issue and an opportunity to really help develop our rural communities. So if you could push that up the food chain, that's a way that you could really benefit our community as you go through this building. One of the greatest problems we saw after the Butte fire was many of our providers did the minimum that was required by law. So, for example, you strung wire that wasn't the wire that you want to put in today. Telephone providers strung cable, pulled cable as we rebuilt. It was a missed opportunity, and I hope that as we go forward, you guys can be part of a solution to helping lift our economy. So I want to thank your staff. Hopefully we'll get better at this power outage. We understand the trees need to come down, and we get it, and there's some people are upset. But those of us who watch the fire burn, we don't want to see that ever happen again. And so I thank you very much for coming up today.
Thank you. I appreciate this feedback, and we'll revisit a number of those items and take a look at that. And you did allude to a history that's there, and I'll just say that we are well aware that we have some work to do to earn back the trust of our communities that we serve. So I hear you loud and clear on that, and we know that trust me is not a phrase that's going to work right now. So that's why we want to be here and showing you the things that we're trying to do. We want to show you, not tell you. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I do have a question that I want to fully understand and hope everybody watching and here understand. During the time of power shut off for safety, that will be during a period of time when there's extreme wind gusts forecast during high fire times. So if this occurs when it's raining or during winter storm, there will not be an automatic shut-off. You will deal with CAL FIRE, local fire departments, as you normally do. But there will not be a massive turn-off of power because it would not constitute a major fire hazard. Is that correct?
that is absolutely 100% correct. And so, lines, again, they come down in storms, and that there is some safety risk there, obviously, when those wires are on the ground. But much different than serving as an ignition source in very dry conditions. So, once we get a couple of decent rainfalls, this program will really be on the shelf for us until next season. Again, don't want to jinx myself, given the weather we've had the last few years, but that would be my hope and expectation. And I could sure use finding every day when I open that email from my meteorology department, I'd like the stress level to come down a little bit. So we're looking at some red flag warnings here the next couple of days, so we're a little bit on edge. But yes, that is 100% accurate. For regular, winter storm type of activity, this program would not be under consideration.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. So I want everybody to understand that it's not something that's going to be the norm now during the whole year, that you guys just because of high winds shut down power lines.
Yeah, and it's really when we've looked at it historically, it really wouldn't be. We don't get dried out enough. Assuming it's somewhat typical weather. We're not really dried out till September and October, and the kind of northerly winds that really are the winds that do this really don't historically crop up until September, October, and into November. So it's really more of a fall phenomenon.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll open it up now to public. Any public questions, comments? Come on up.
District 2, Butte fire victim. Point of order.
Good morning, Terry McBride, Mountain Ranch, Butte Fire survivor. 3 houses, 5 properties negatively affected. And I'm wondering, it's wonderful that you want to take care of the trees and the wind and that sort of a thing. But I'm wondering about the dead trees that are all standing and we're dodging. Because apparently since the county is losing its income and wants to spend what little there is on payroll for our department heads, we're going to bring tourism into Mountain Ranch with Dodge the Falling Trees. And we'll see how long that one lasts, because that's about what it's like right now. So I wonder, where is your responsibility for the fire and the dead trees that we have at this time along our roads, along our properties? And when I try to drive out my driveway, I have to go get my chainsaw because I got a damn pine tree right across it.
Ma'am, can you address the board, please?
Yes, I can. But they should hear it too, because I don't want them to come up here and feel like they're just doing everything perfectly. Actually, this shirt is appropriate. The reality is they have people out there cutting trees. They're supposed to cut those trees to the distance so that we don't have to have people have their electricity off. Now, the one thing I will give them is they call people 24 to 48 hours ahead of time, go get a generator, get some water, get some food. Take care of yourself, for God's sakes. Or move back to the city and let them take care of you. But up here, we stand on our own, we take care of ourselves. We don't need people taking care of us. We've had this conversation before. I appreciate that you had these folks come up and talk to us, but by gollies, it just doesn't seem true to me, a lot of what they're saying, and they're once again putting off their responsibility. PG&E is one of the most expensive electric in the country. We should not have to have people have their electricity turned off. And folks that are on breathing devices and such should not have to worry about having their electricity turned off. That's not, I mean, if you have a storm, but the reality is they've got these guys out there cutting trees. They're supposed to clear the lines with these cut trees that are cut that shouldn't be laying on the tree line, but now they're using this excuse to turn electricity off. And here's what I see as another grand way to get the people out of the country, get them out of the hills, get them out of self-reliance.
Good morning, gentlemen. Bill Wilson, District 1. It's been a while. Been working with Common Ground, driving vets that can't drive themselves anymore to the hospital at Mather. They're living in places, they have no water because the springs dried up. They have no power because PG&E keeps turning it off. They're living from hand to mouth because they served our country. One happened to be an ex-probation officer here. He can't take care of himself anymore. Has to have somebody come in and take care of him because he doesn't have power and he doesn't have water. PG&E, because he doesn't have a phone, he doesn't know when they're turning his power off. They just turn it off. No problem. So his food, what little he has, now goes bad in the refrigerator and the freezer. PG&E, they're trying to keep from another lawsuit, start another fire. They're not really doing what they should be doing. If they were out there doing what they should be doing, we wouldn't have fires. There wouldn't be trees under power lines. Those trees would be cut. Those trees would be trimmed. Isn't that what started the Butte fire? Somebody trying to trim trees by power lines? Anyway, have a good day, Doc. Hope you voted.
Good morning, Chris John Colts, District 2, Butte Fire victim. One PG&E representative spoke of the 36 hours being, some of the least amount of sleep they've had in their entire life. I would counter that. September of 2015, I had about 7 days when I didn't sleep at all. I don't feel bad for people from PG&E having to do their job. I went to the meeting in Mountain Ranch, I guess it was 2 weeks ago. We heard the same presentation. Afterwards, they came to us and said, hey, if anybody's having any problem, we'll take your name, we'll get a hold of you. The transformer from my property from 2015 is still sitting in my garden where they left it after they replaced it. I've called them 3 times, they've never come and picked it up. They felled a bull pine that was gonna fall into their lines after they burned it up. They said they would come and remove it. The tree is 4 feet in diameter. I have absolutely no way to move it. They've never come back and removed it. I was actually on PG&E's side with the clearing. I allowed them to come on my property. They made an absolute mess of my property. My tractor was destroyed in the fire they caused, so I can't clean it up. One of the walking paths is a foot deep in silt and twigs, and I told them I want no logs left on my property. They just basically ran down the hill and threw everything to the side, and they left. They haven't contacted me after that meeting. They've never contacted me as a follow-up to any time I've ever contacted them since the fire. I have never received a response. I don't feel sorry for them. I don't think the utility should be felt sorry for. They're not doing their job, and now they're trying to scapegoat it onto somebody else. It's pitiful.
Other public comments?
Mike Falvey, District 2. Appreciate Mr. Johnson and his staff coming up, and our OES director does a fine job from what I see. A couple things. For me personally, PG&E's actions go back way before the fire. Let's go back to San Bruno, situation in San Bruno. They were They were fined because of their deceptive practices. They lied, they deceived customers, they cut back their safety procedures, all in the name of one thing: profit. And that could be, you could fast forward to our situation here, the Butte Fire. That might be one of the reasons our Butte Fire started. The chase for profits. Now, Mr. Johnson, I respectfully appreciate you coming up here, but a couple quotes. He says PG&E has to have a mindset shift, and that is one of their mindset shifts. Get away from profits, get back to customer safety. It comes from the top. Mr. Johnson has a supervisor. His supervisor has a supervisor, et cetera, all the way to the top. From what I see at PG&E, it's profits, and it's passed down to Mr. Johnson, who has a job to do, does it the best he can, but he's under pressure to increase profits. I mean, it's proven in San Bruno. They cut back their safety measures. It's proven. They were fined. The inter-company emails were uncovered. Very deceptive. So reassess is another word he used, I quote. And yes, they have to reassess a lot. And I think the reassessment of corporate profits is one of the things they have to reassess, because that will lead to our safety, yours, your ladies, everybody's. So let's be real here.
Other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Mr. Johnson, would you like to address any of the comments, questions that were asked?
Well, I would just say one thing I did want to speak to specifically was the removal of the dead and dying trees that we've seen since the drought. So the last couple of years, we've been spending close to $200 million a year for tree removal in a program specifically targeting the dead and dying trees. You know, at these kind of altitudes, you know, certainly the Sierra foothills is a big place where we've seen that. And so that is a big area of focus. There are an estimate of somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million dead trees in California. We certainly haven't gotten to all of them, but that is a big area of focus for us on that. And then I would just reiterate what I said to the Vice Chair, Supervisor Garamendi. You know, just hearing that customer feedback is very real, and it does remind me that we have some work to do as a company to earn back people's trust. So we are very focused on safety, and it is a huge part of what we're doing. It is the single largest initiative that we've got going as a company. We still have a business to run, but there's very little that we're not looking at through a wildfire lens currently. So, but again, have me back and have me prove it to you and show you through the actions that we've taken. Don't let my words be enough. I'd like to be proving it with the actions that we take and the behaviors that we demonstrate in working with the community. So again, thank you for having me today. And again, I would. I've gone to a couple of county supervisor meetings since this, and I would say what I said there. I will always prefer to come to you and talk to you about the programs that we're doing to mitigate risk and to come and justify our actions if we have to turn off power than to be up here. And certainly this is a topic sensitive in this community that we're up here talking about a fire that we bear responsibility for. So again, thank you for having me and appreciate your time and listening to what we're attempting to do moving forward here.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And with that, this is an informational item, so we will take a 10-minute break before moving on. All right, we're back in session. We'll move on to item number 15 of the regular agenda. Madam Clerk.
Item 15 is from the Administrative Office. To make findings that an emergency exists and that action is necessary to respond to such emergency, to dispense with competitive bidding requirements pursuant to County Ordinance Title III, Chapter 3.29 and Chapter 2.5, Emergency Contracting Procedures, Section 22050 of the Public Contract Code, and authorize the purchasing agent to let an emergency contract with All Sierra Roof Company Incorporated of Jackson, California, for emergency repairs to the roofs of Building A, D, and E of the County Government Center campus. This requires a 4/5 vote of the board.
Bonnie?
Good morning, members of the board. Bonnie Rich, administration. This item is coming back to the board, providing the board with additional details on the total project cost for the emergency repairs to the deteriorated skylight structures on the roofs of buildings A, D, and E. In this agenda packet, we provided you with the construction services agreement. The total cost for the repairs is $162,326. We're going to use a two-phased approach. The proposed treatment for the deteriorated conditions will include phase one, which is the removal of the existing doghouse structures and repairs and replacement of permanent structures, including the installation of new skylights, fascia boards, and framing as required. Phase two will be the pressure washing of the roofs and application of a silicone-based seal coating on the flashing cement on the perimeter and base flashings where needed. This contract is written to have all work performed within 45 days from the issuance of the notice to proceed. It will be that notice to proceed. This contract has not been reviewed by council and risk yet. I apologize for that. We're still waiting on the performance bond and automobile liability. Then we're going to route the contract through risk and council. Included in this agenda item is a resolution which authorizes the county administrative officer to execute the agreement. And then pursuant to public contract code, this item will remain on the agenda, and we will report and update the board as needed until a notice of completion, until all work has been finished and completed, and a notice of completion and acceptance is issued.
Any board questions? Supervisor Mills.
The question is if council hasn't reviewed it and we approve it,
The agenda item is asking your board to approve the CAO to execute the agreement conditioned upon county council and risk management review and approval. Yes, sir.
that condition is a critical
Yes.
piece. Thank you.
Yes.
Supervisor Oliveira?
I don't believe, thank you, Mr. Chair, but I don't believe I have information regarding a total replacement cost of the roof. I know it's addressed in the agenda item. Do we have any idea what that number might be?
No, not yet, and I can bring Corey, our project manager, up here to speak to the board more about that. We are asking for the board to allow us to do the emergency repairs to the skylights while we continue to work with Aspen Street Architects to finish the drawings for the total roof replacement. The goal would be to have those architectural drawings completed this winter, put that out to bid appropriately. We will have to come back to the board and ask the board to adopt the plans and specifications for that bid. We will put it out for bid with the anticipation of work to begin in spring of 2019 for total replacement of A, D, and E roofs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Mills?
Corey, question. Has anybody done any probing of the substrate on those roofs to determine whether there's any soft spots or?
So we did do an investigation on the dog houses. We did not expose or open any of that. There are soft spots that are visible, as well as deteriorated areas where water has been sitting and deteriorated the current substructure.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions. This is to replace the skylights also? If we're putting dog houses over the skylights, which was the measure that was done before when they were leaking, why are we replacing them and just not removing them, filling in the roof, and not having the skylights at all? Because we're putting them in and then we're building something over them, so they're not exposed and actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
So there's a few different reasons for that. First and foremost, because of the urgency of where we're at and how long these roofs haven't been taken care of that have been leaking for some time. We would have to actually open up this entire roof like we discussed last time, be able to go back to the structural steel and torch that off and then close those roofs back up. The original design has the elongated skylights and is basically a flat area on the top of that roof. So our water's not draining appropriately the way that it needs to. So the original design was never very good. So about 20 years ago, and these dog houses have lasted for about 20 years, they've gone through and put those structural steel structures in for the concrete parapet that now has that wood truss structure on top of it with the asphalt shingles. So for the financial efficiency of what we're doing, and it's not a temporary fix. We are doing a permanent fix. The reason for the replacement of skylights, there's been some, the original skylights, there's been some plexiglass and things that have been put over that to cover it for the years. It's dingy, it's dark, it doesn't allow the natural day lighting
You
that
can see them, yeah.
Yeah.
You can see 'em.
And so it doesn't allow the natural day lighting. So we're not going and reframing and formulating a frame inset for those skylights. We're just cleaning up that original skylight so that we can let some of that natural day lighting through.
Okay, but this is a permanent fix, so when they come back for the remainder of the roof, these will already be addressed and they won't be part of that. And this is part of our budget that we approved in September, and actually in June, it was part of our prelim budget too. So it's coming out of COP funds, not general fund, so which are meant for improvements. So, any other questions? If not, any public questions, comments?
Terry McBride, District 2. Just a quick one I want to put out there. I'm not quite sure how the bidding process and all that works, but I would really hope that businesses in Calaveras County were offered the opportunity to quote on this, because we do have roofing companies, and I'm quite sure that the one in Amador is amazing, but what about our own? And I would hope, and I would put out there that when we have bids, that those within this county are looked at first, as long as they are capable and able to do what is needed at a reasonable price, instead of going out of county. And absolutely nothing against Amador. I love Amador. They're great people. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments, bring it back. You have an answer, Bonnie, on the question? No? Okay. Corey? Why we chose this?
We didn't choose this particular person. We notified and contacted several different roofing contractors. I was out there 3 separate times with 3 separate contractors, trying to determine what would be the best solution in moving forward. This contractor was the most responsive out of any of them, because we were getting our backs up against the wall as far as timing of when this needed to be done. He ended up surfacing to the top when we were out there determining. Again, it was more or less a design build that we were trying to come up with, so that we would not be spending a temporary fix and we would be making a permanent fix along with this.
Okay. Any other board comments, questions? If not, I'm open for a motion on this item.
Chair, I'll move the item.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills. Do I have a second?
Mr. Chair, I'll second the motion.
Second by Supervisor Oliveira. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Okay, we have a meeting on December what? And then December, we have 3 meetings. So by our last meeting in December, this will all be done, right?
I'm sorry, what was that?
By the last meeting in December, it'll be all complete, right? 45 days?
Able to be reporting on the complete project, and that we will then start looking at what we're going to be doing in the spring.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on. Item number 16, Auditor Controller, Madam Clerk.
Item 16 is to authorize the board chair to execute an agreement between the County of Calaveras and the Calaveras Transit Agency for county financial and auditing services.
And no one from COG or the Transit is here. I guess Dennis and I.
We're it.
We're it.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair,
We have what? Our auditor? Yeah. Rebecca.
This is just an agreement between the Calaveras Transit Agency, my office, and the Treasurer Tax Collector to provide county financial and auditing services. We looked at what the costs of performing some similar duties for the transit when it was under the county umbrella, and then that's kind of what we based this first go around on. So it may be less, or we may have to, it may be more. We're not entirely sure what it's ultimately going to look like, because CTA is likely going to run a little bit differently than our former transit system. So,
Supervisor Mills, your light's on. You have a question?
My apologies, but I had a question anyway. So you're going to be running the checks for them as well?
They're treasured in our treasury. We do all of their accounts payable. We process their payroll. We're processing all of their vendor requests, vendor payments, 1099 reporting. All the budget goes through my office. We will be handling all of the accrual information, all of the tracking of the capital assets, the depreciation on the existing equipment, and any capital projects that they're currently doing. And then assisting them with the financial reporting.
Now, COG did hire a bookkeeper. You'll be working with that bookkeeper for transit as well, or there's no relationship with the COG bookkeeper at all for this?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not at all. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the county has been doing COG's payroll and expense financials since 2010. I think it was, the city was doing it before that, and it turned into a problem, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we moved it to county. So, any other board comments or questions? Supervisor Oliveira.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I understand this, the CTA will be using our accounting services, and we're going to be compensated for that.
Yes.
And I seem to recall approximately about a year ago, there was some conflict on an auditor hired by the City of Angels and our auditor's office regarding the transit system. Has that been resolved? I seem to recall we had some problems with that.
There were issues with, so the Transportation Development Act, that, because we're using transportation dollars, has a separate audit than the county audit, and that all runs through the Council of Governments. So they will come in and do an audit of how the Council of Governments has spent the TDA funds, how the county has, and how the city has. And in the course of that, there were some accounting changes that they wanted to be made that were not in line with the history all the way back to transit starting, way back when. And so they wanted us to change our chart of accounts, and they wanted COG to take a more active role in disclosing various liabilities and receivables. And they also wanted transit to do the same thing, and that wasn't happening. So there was kind of failure of meeting of the minds to determine exactly what it was that they wanted to see in terms of changes of the chart of accounts. I met with the lead auditor for the TDA auditors, and really kind of went through exactly how he wanted the chart of accounts for the Council of Governments to be set up, and also how he wanted to see how we were accruing various types of revenue on the county side. And so he wanted there to be kind of equity between the county's financial statements and the Council of Governments financial statements and Transit's financial statements. And there wasn't. So the issue is, you know, we have a 60-day accrual period. They wanted to go longer. They wanted certain things to be accrued, but we don't know necessarily the agreements that that the Council of Governments was getting approved that would create kind of future liabilities. So we kind of had to shore that up and get that process kind of dialed in. So all of that has happened at this point, and I think now with transit financial activities moving out over to the JPA, I think it'll be a lot smoother because we'll have everything in line with what we need it to be.
So this new process that's been corrected, if you will they be auditing on their own and then matching ours, or are we subject to their audit, or are they going to take our proceedings as being their audit?
They're separate audits, and they've always been separate audits, and they will continue to be separate audits. But we needed to have, basically like a marriage between the two different audits to try to ensure that what we are reporting is what they're reporting. And some of it has been a matter of I kind of just had to stand firm and say, we have a 60-day accrual period. I'm not going 90, I'm not going 120, I'm not going 6 months. We have a 60-day accrual period. So now there is certainly, we will look at materiality of certain revenues that came in October that we didn't know about, and we'll have that dialogue with the TDA auditors to see exactly how they want to deal with it. But instead of getting written up on it because they wanted us to accrue it, even though it happened outside of our 60-day period, and I won't accrue it because it's outside of our 60-day period, which would be in conflict with our process and our reporting standards. We're just going to coordinate with them, and they'll just have it be a footnote. So we're still in compliance for generally acceptable accounting principles, and we're on the same page, but he'll include it as footnotes as opposed to a finding.
And you're confident this is the fix?
That what is the fix?
That our new system, we've made our corrections, and we can work within this agenda
We made all
item.
the changes over 12 months ago, so.
And you're confident that this is good?
Yes.
Good answer.
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, so.
Thank you.
Any other board questions? Any public comments? Seeing no public comments, we'll bring it back to the board. I'm looking for a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Mills. We have a second by Supervisor Clapp. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Diane, do you want me to give these are the two contracts?
Moving on to item number 17, behavioral health services and mental health programs.
Item 17 is to approve the Health and Human Services Agency Behavioral Health Division Mental Health Programs Mental Health Services Act fiscal year 2018-19 annual update.
Morning, Kristen.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Kristen Brinks, Health and Human Services Agency. Before your board today is our annual update to a 3-year Mental Health Services Act plan that we have, which does provide tremendous support to our community for community services and supports prevention and early intervention and innovation. It did go through a thorough public hearing, input process, and again, as I mentioned, we are in year 2 of 3. There haven't been too many significant changes, but one of the changes that we're particularly happy about is that we will be adding a couple of new programs and services to our community based off of obtaining additional grants from outside sources. vocational services in support of employment, case management, additional triage services in our community that focus on youth to work in collaboration and in partnership with our adult-based crisis services that we have, and then a couple of other small programs. But this is, again, an annual update that we bring before your board. So if you have any questions, we can answer them.
Supervisor Mills.
Just a real quick question. Thank you for this update. The $3 million, that's a one-year figure or 3-year?
That's our annual update.
That's an
or
annual
amount,
figure, is $3 million.
Yeah, it is the bulk of our behavioral health budget.
All right, thank you.
Any of your board questions? Any public comments, questions? Seeing none, bring it back to the board, look for a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Supervisor Clapp. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Garamendi. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item number 18 is Human Services.
Item 18 is to authorize the board chair to execute an agreement with Five Claw Maintenance for janitorial services in the Human Services Building located at 509 East St. Charles Street, San Andreas, in an amount not to exceed $43,789 for the period of October 1, 2018 through March 31st, 2019.
Kristen, you want someone to clean your offices, huh?
Yes, we would like that. Kristen Brinks, Health and Human Services. At the request of the County Administrative Office, it was requested that we negotiate an extension for our Five Claw cleaning contract, and so we did so, and that's what this item is.
Any board questions? Supervisor Garamendi.
No problem with SEIU on this?
Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director, and yes, I did have a meeting with SEIU and also updated them that this contract is only for 6 months, and so it is not a long-term contract. If for some reason it goes beyond the 6 months, then we will have another meet and confer.
So they're okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other board questions? Supervisor Mills?
Just real quick, Kristen, this is the number is the same monthly rate as they've been under their original contract, so there's no changes to that.
I don't know if it's the exact number, but it's very close to it. I could obtain that information, but it's very close to the rate that we had, if it's not the exact same rate.
Okay.
I'm sure my team is texting me right now with a yes or no as I'm standing up here.
It does include cobwebs?
It does include cobwebs, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any public comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board and look for a motion. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Garamendi.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Mills. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item number 19 from Human Resources again.
Item 19 is the introduction and waiver of the reading requirement for an ordinance adding section 2.05.010 to the county code, setting the new approved compensation and existing benefits for the elected positions of the auditor controller, assessor, clerk recorder, and treasurer tax collector, and also authorize the publication of a summary ordinance.
I apologize, Human Resources.
No problem.
Judy, you're up.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. And as direction that was given from the board to staff, I am bringing back before you the introduction and waiver of the reading requirement for the ordinance, adding both a section 2.05.010 to our county code. This is so we can codify any changes to the elected salaries. And I am bringing before you the cost of the changes as directed, which would be giving a 2% increase in, I apologize.
3%.
3% increase in January and a 2% increase in July. And so then the cost to fiscal year 18-19 would be $7,850 if you round it off. And then 1920 would be $35,496.
Supervisor Garamendi, your light's on?
Just so I'm clear, so it's 3% on January plus the 2% COLA?
Yes, because the COLA has already been approved. It's already
Plus
coming to
2%,
them.
so it's a 7% raise between now and July.
Overall, yes.
Thank you.
Supervisor Mills, your light wasn't, I thought it was on, sorry. Any other board questions or comments? Seeing none, bring it back, or excuse me, I'll put it out for public comment or questions. Any public comment?
Again, Terry McBride, Mountain Ranch. As you're making these decisions, I want you to remember that the approval rating of how this county is being ran and the road that we're going down is at 28%. 56% disapprove of what's happening. And the fact that a raise is being offered at a time that just over a fourth of the people think the jobs are being done well makes me wonder. Also at a time that the income is dropping in this county. We have lost sales tax revenue. We have a business, a wonderful business in Mountain Ranch that's been there for 15 years. They're moving to another county. Guess what they're taking with them? Sales tax revenue. Many people aren't rebuilding because of what's going on in this county. They just don't even want to be here anymore. So what I'm guessing is to help make up and to cover these raises and such is the property taxes. And I find it so very interesting that our assessor's office, who's going to be getting a raise, is like $6,000 behind, which is about what it's been all year. I don't know many people that don't do their job and then get a raise. Well, in the government, I suppose. So instead, apparently it's coming after us property tax owners, and I find it really, really odd that in Mountain Ranch, where I've had 5 properties injured by that fire, lost 3 houses, our property that we live on lost everything on it, lost the trees, and is now worth 30% more than before the fire in regards to the land, mind you, not structure, because there isn't one yet. And then other properties is the same thing, where the value of the land has gone up with the trees have been destroyed, but the value of the lands are going up 30 to 70%. So once again, let's put it on the back of the taxpayers. Let's put poor decisions made by board members, some, and put it on the back of the taxpayers. And I would cruelly encourage anybody that's watching this on YouTube, anybody here, to go ahead and file an appeal with the assessor's office if they feel that what they're being assessed is unfair. Because when 98% of my trees are dying, falling down, or just plain dead, and now my value of land is worth 30% more than it was before it was a beautiful, amazing forest filled with cedar and pine and oaks. I mean, it was amazing. It's not anymore. But apparently it's worth 30% more. I love the math. It must be this new core. I don't know. But it doesn't make sense to me, and I really wish you would consider this as you're considering a raise when everybody else is having to tighten their budgets, tighten their belts. Yet department heads are getting a raise, whether how big it is or not. It's the idea of getting one when everybody else in this county is cutting back. Thank you.
Joan Wilson, District 1. Beautiful day today, by the way. You know, you may have a bit more public comment if some of these meetings were held when the public can actually attend, because many people work. I believe the people over here deserve a raise. I'm not so sure about you guys. Anyway, have a great day. I have an article for you all to read. I will hand it to this beautiful person over here. And happy voting day.
Other public comments?
It seems funny, gentlemen, that you can cut $13 million out of the taxes and still afford to give people 21% raises. I don't know how you do that math, but I guess it's priority-based budgeting. Is that it? Is that how you do it? You take money that you don't have and promise it to people that are working for you so they won't go somewhere else? seems a little funny. Not that those people don't deserve a raise, or not that probably the board doesn't deserve a raise, but it seems really strange to me that you cut off a $350 million industry, see those sales tax plummet for 3 quarters, and make excuses and then get elected officials and promise them a 25% raise. I hope you can do the math and it works. Hope you can afford to pay CalPERS. Hope you can afford to pay their retirement. I just don't understand you gentlemen, some of you. Sorry.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Bring it back to the board. Supervisor Mills?
Oh, I was just going to make a motion. No comment.
In the comments, Judy, about 21% raise, 25% raise, this is not at 21%.
No, and as Supervisor Garamendi had brought up earlier, the increases that they will be receiving, there already is a 2% COLA that was approved last year. And so that is not a part of what is being approved today. What is being reviewed today is a 3% increase in January and then a 2% increase in July of 2019. And so the increase right now would be 5% plus the 2% COLA.
And is that along the lines of what the board approved for other employees in the county during negotiations with the units that we did?
And in some aspects, for positions that were this big of a disparity, they received a 5% and a 5%, or in some cases, a little bit more than that. So this would be definitely in line or less than what some of the other bargaining units received.
Okay. Supervisor Garamendi?
Thank you. I have a question. It's more of a statement. I think we are all aware that what we're doing here is we are voting ourselves a raise as well. And because of the way our ordinance is put together, I have to admit I'm a little bit confused. It was just a couple weeks ago we were talking about refunding money to people who registered for a program in this county, and yet we didn't trust our own staff, but we trust them enough to give them a raise. I just have to admit, gentlemen, this whole thing is confusing. I think it's a bad idea, and I think it ought to be postponed or just voted down.
Any other board comments on this item? No? I'm open for a motion.
I'll move the item, Chair.
I have a motion by Supervisor Mills. Do I have a second? I have a second by Supervisor Clapp. Any other board comments? No? I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No. Did not pass. Moving on to item number 20. This is the Clerk of the Board of Supervisors.
So item 20 is to introduce and waive reading of an ordinance repealing ordinance number 2169 and rescinding the County of Calaveras Chapter 5.12.380-5.12.384, which established the Calaveras County Public Educational and Governmental PEG Television Commission and authorizing a summary publication of the ordinance prior to adoption. As part of the review that the clerk was tasked with earlier this year, I've been looking at each of the boards, committees, and commissions. And so in looking at the PEG TV Commission, we determined that this commission was established by ordinance many years ago, and it is not required to be established by ordinance. And in addition to being established by ordinance, it was subsequently modified by resolution, which really isn't the way that it should be done. So what we are proposing for this group is that we repeal that ordinance that established them and then reestablish the commission at a future meeting date by resolution. So that should the group want to make changes to their membership or whatever it is, they don't have to go through the process of adopting an ordinance to do so. What we are going to be proposing when this comes back to be reestablished by resolution is we're proposing to increase the length of the terms, because at this point they are 1 year, 2 years, I think, 2 years. We are proposing that we extend them for 4 years and that we stagger them more appropriately. At this point, they're not staggered. They have the bulk of their membership expiring at one time. So we're just trying to kind of make them more successful, get those positions that they wanted added by resolution added as voting members, and move forward. So this is the introduction and waive reading, repealing the original ordinance. So at the next meeting, we would have one, if we adopt that ordinance, then we would reestablish them by resolution. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Supervisor Olivera, your light's on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Clerk, the reason for increasing the membership to 7 members, can you touch on that?
Sure. So originally, when established, the commission was established with 1 representative from each supervisorial district. Later, in the early 2000s, 2 other positions were added. One was a representative of government, which usually was someone from the CAO's office, and one was a member from the Calaveras County Office of Education. They felt that these 2 positions were beneficial to the tasks that they had at hand, and so we have had those positions for many years. However, they weren't part of the ordinance, therefore they weren't part of county code. So what we're doing is basically a housekeeping type issue where we're keeping those members or reestablishing those members. And we're just giving them a longer term overall because they don't meet very frequently. They meet once or twice a year. And if they're expiring every couple years, they're maybe going once or twice and then they have to reapply. It's labor intensive. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
It does, and adequately. What does this committee do?
This committee advises public access television. They discuss policies that the studio has they make recommendations on policies, and they make recommendations on the purchase of equipment, and things that will help the studio move forward with the times and the technology.
And they are advisory then?
They are advisory.
Who has that ultimate responsibility for those issues? Is it the director of our public access TV, Mr. Lark?
PATV is a division of the administrative office. So that is another reason why having that representative from the CAO's office on the commission is beneficial.
Thank you.
Any other board comments? Any public comments? See no public comment, bring it back for a motion. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Olivera has a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Supervisor Garamendi. Call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item number 21. I believe I have one person on here.
Yes. Item 21 is the appointment of applicants to serve on various committees, commissions, advisory boards, and county service areas. And there is one vacancy and one position. And I do have to apologize because I neglected to put in the name of the committee. in the staff
Air
memo.
pollution control.
And so it is the Air Pollution Control Hearing Board, and we have one vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2020 for an engineer, and we have an application from Matt Ospital.
Okay, and I have a question for county council. Do we need to recess as the Board of Supervisors and reconvene?
No, they're different.
No.
This is not the Air Pollution Control District Board. This
Oh,
is
it's the hearing board. Okay,
This
I'm
is the
sorry.
hearing
Okay,
board.
All right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. All right. Does anybody have any objections to this appointment? Seeing none, does anybody in the public have any objections or comments? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
A motion by Supervisor Mills.
I'll second it.
Second by Supervisor Clapp. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to supervisor announcements.
In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports on meetings they attended at the expense of the local agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, such as mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meeting attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
We'll start with Supervisor Clapp.
Thank you. Yeah, I attended the Area 12 last Thursday, and I will be attending Good Morning Calaveras tomorrow morning at the hospital.
Is that it?
That's it.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, one of the announcements is I attended the departing gathering at CCWD for Dave Edgerton, their general manager, who has accepted a position as the executive director of Aqua. So our local boy makes good kind of thing was very important, I think, as we move forward in the topic of water discussions throughout the state of California, and he will represent us well. Also on Friday the 26th, I attended Mountain County's meeting in Auburn, where I had a chance to have a personal discussion. Is that your phone or mine? Mine. Where I had a chance to have a personal discussion with Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, Brenda Berman, regarding New Maloney's Lake Tulloch and how the federal government works within that realm, and then to also have some conversations with her staff regarding New Maloney, specifically the Natural Bridges Trailhead on Parrots Ferry is being overwhelmed by more visitors than they're capable of handling. So it is creating an issue for us as a county, but it also is an issue I think that they need to address because it is their trailhead. So having that personal contact with her, I think, meant a lot to both of us to have her with a direct understanding of how Maloney's fits in the economy of Calaveras County and how the federal government can assist us. And those are my two meetings.
And I noticed that Ed Pattison, former CCWD
Yes,
director, was appointed to Tuolumne County.
He was up in Auburn. Now, Ed's background, just so people would like to know, is that he was a general manager at Mountain House and went through a TIF with the Water Board during the droughts of 2015 and actually won. So
He was Ione city manager too after he left CCWD.
Absolutely correct.
So, yeah, he's been around.
So
He's
he
kind of a local boy.
he brings a background of CCWD and Calaveras County to what he's doing at Tuolumne Utility District now too. And having that previous relationship with him means a lot as we continue to work together.
Yeah,
Correct.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Supervisor Oliveira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I attended the Murphy's Business Association meeting on November 1st, which was Thursday, and one of the issues discussed was the Murphy's Lighting District and those projects. And I'm happy to say that, excuse me, that our Public Works and our CAO's office are engaged in that. I understand there's a pretty sizable amount of budgeted monies, and we're going to try to use those. Thank you.
Try. Or we're going to use. Is that it?
That's it.
Supervisor Garamendi?
There's nothing I'm required to report.
Okay, and I have nothing that I'm required to report either. I have no expense account, so all the meetings I attended were absolutely free of charge. I do want to say that Supervisor Oliveira and I did attend Central Sierra Child Support Agency meeting at the board chambers in Tuolumne County last week, and I'd never been there to those chambers. It's kind of a tight situation trying to find it. It's a very narrow street they're on, and parking is kind of scarce. But the chambers were kind of nice. They were adequate. They were similar to ours, but they were upstairs. You had to take, I think it's 4th floor. Yeah, the 4th floor is where you went. So, and they had an emblem, their county emblem, up on the wall behind them. It was actually a crocheted rug. Up in the back there. It was kind of interesting. But that's all I have to report. CAO Lutz, do you have anything? No? Nothing from County Council? Madam Clerk?
No.
No?
No.
Susan, anything on COG? All right, Supervisor Mills and myself do have a COG meeting tomorrow evening here in these chambers. And with that, we are adjourned.